Good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Kelsey Kephart. I'm the founder of Embark MBA. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the CBS interview. I know interviews can cause panic, can cause anxiety. Hopefully with this session, you'll be well prepared to jump into that interview. Let's get started. I'm wearing my lucky color, my brand color sweater, so I know it's going to be a great session. I'm a little bit more conversational, so as you have questions, please utilize that Q&A box. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? So first, we're going to talk about some baseline information for the CBS interview. We'll move into how you should prepare, should move into questions that you must nail, some behavioral questions, and then examples of really good questions and not so good questions. Let's talk a little bit about who I am. My name's Kelsey. Like I told you before, I'm formerly CBS AdCom, and during that time, I did a lot. I traveled the world and gave information sessions. I read every single one of the applications that came through. But most pertinent for this conversation today, I managed the global interview program. I trained the alums and the current students to be good interviewers. I made sure everyone in the world had someone to interview, even if that was with me. Beyond that, I was a final committee member. It's a lot like what you think it is. It's a group of us sitting around a table reviewing everything again and making a final decision. And then after that, also pertinent, I was a waitlist manager. So anyone waitlisted during that time, they had me as a partner. I've been working with clients since 2020. I have expertise across all schools, not just Columbia, although I'm very familiar with it. And just to give you a quick snapshot, round one, 87% of my clients were successful. We got $2.3 million in scholarship with an average of $184,000 per person. And then just a couple quick schools that represent my client success. Back to Columbia. So let's give some baseline information. I'll move through this pretty quickly. When will I hear? Columbia has changed its process. And so what they're telling folks is that by February 20th, you will hear. They are rolling out decisions and interview invites. I hear a lot. Does it matter? Is it a bad sign if I haven't heard yet? It's not. People underestimate how tough it is to look through all these applications. Columbia has chosen to roll these out in stages. So you're still in the game if you haven't heard yet. Who is the interviewer? So it can be an alum, a current student, or less frequently, but still possible, a member of the admissions committee. Interview format. Columbia is blind. The only thing they get is your resume. They've moved to a virtual only format, so know that. How long is the interview? About 30 minutes. So they're not telling people exactly how much. They'll say your interview's at 11 o'clock. Do be flexible. It can run longer. I just had a couple of clients interview and their conversation went for an hour. Please don't book a doctor's appointment right after your interview because you want to be relaxed. What happens after the interview? So the interviewer is charged with writing the interview report, feedback on how that conversation went, and then you are off in queue for final committee. Is there anything else I should know? Absolutely. So Columbia is one of those schools that gives you instructions. So 2 things to mind. Every year someone forgets to do it. You must send your resume to your interviewer when you are matched. You're generally finding out when you're matched about 48 hours before the interview. And Columbia puts the onus on you to coordinate a video conferencing link. You can check with your interviewer about their preference, but Zoom, Meets, Google Hangouts, whatever, just pay attention to those instructions. All right. I always like to contextualize a little bit about what the interview is and what it's not, because I think that helps people approach the interview. What it's not. It is not testing how smart you are, how technical you are or are not, nor how polished you are. No, don't get me wrong. You have to have good, clear answers, but they're not checking to see if you have that veneer. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about how you shouldn't have that veneer. You should really approach this as a conversation. You should be yourself. And this is not a job interview. A lot of people say, oh, if I nail the interview, I'm definitely getting in. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but the opposite is also true. If you don't have a very good interview, admissions takes that into context. Maybe why was that the case? And so if you don't have a good interview, it doesn't mean you're out of the game. What the interview is instead, it is a chance to learn more. Because you've gotten to that stage, at least 2 members of the admissions committee has read your full application and says, let's talk more. It's also a double click to see if the information you conveyed in your application, the tone, the substance is the same that you're showing up with at the interview. When I was in admissions, you'd be surprised. There were times where someone said, oh, I definitely want to go into investment banking after my MBA. And then in the interview, they'd say, I'm going right into private equity. Those are two different goals. And so they are checking to see if the information conveyed application to interview is the same. So keep your story straight. Third, are you a community fit? Are you someone that this person would enjoy sharing the alumni community with you? And then finally, to detect your level of interest. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can convey that. Moving on, how to prepare. I've got a lot of advice here. So first, know that the only mistake possible in an interview is being so nervous that you cannot be yourself, that you can't convey personality. I have two tricks. How do you get into the zone? Two things, including a trick that I used to use before I got on stage and gave information sessions to hundreds of folks. So first, approach this as just another coffee chat, right? You've probably done them a fair amount because you've gotten to the stage. And so it's just another conversation. Your interview is rooting for you. Secondly, there's a little bit of a perspective shift you can do. Instead of, oh, this is my CBS MBA interview, you can think about it as, I'm catching up with an old friend who I haven't spoken to in a while. I can't wait to hear what they have to say. Just shifts instead of a fight or flight moment. It's a, maybe you're even looking forward to it. But what if you can't get in the zone? Really, when you open up that conversation, if it's so unshakable that you're just so nervous, you can say, hi, interviewer, it's so nice to meet you. I have to warn you, I'm a little nervous for this. I really like Columbia. It's a very humanizing thing to do. It's very disarming because the other person was in your shoes once upon a time. And so that can really kind of break the ice. All right, moving on. Secondly, you actually have some agency in this interview. It's not you just sitting there and just taking question after question. You are actually setting the pace and the tone. So if you open up and say, hey, I'm really nervous, or hey, I'm really excited to meet you, it really starts a conversation off on a nice foot. Secondly, you got to be aware of what the interviewer is charged with. They have to both actively listen to you and take notes. That's hard, right? They're actually in a tough position too. And so don't speak too much or too long, be clear, have a little bit of grace, understanding what the other person's up against. Third, read your application. I cannot say this enough. You put so much time and effort, especially into Essay 1, goals, and Essay 3. How are you going to co-create your optimal curriculum experience at Columbia? You've already thought about a lot of these questions. And so please read your application because that'll give you a lot of specifics that make for strong answers. Fourth, nail the basics, but we're going to cover that in a second. My last tip for preparing is you never know what's going to be asked, right? Alums, current students, admissions could really dig into something. You can't anticipate every question. You shouldn't sound rehearsed. As long as you know your story, of course, your application, but if you really know your career to date, your goals, the things that bring you joy, your hobbies, your loved ones, a trip that you took once upon a time, your major decisions that you've made throughout your life, either why you took that role or why you chose that program for undergrad. And then finally, times where you really won and lost. If you know those things really well, you will reach that level of zen and being able to answer anything. All right, so that's how to prepare. Let's talk about how to make the interview great. I've chosen 3 pretty foundational questions that I just want to walk through how I think about them and some tips on a framework about how to make them great and clear for you to say and clear for the other person to listen to. First, tell me about yourself. Your interview is always going to open with this kind of, I call it like an icebreaker question. There's many flavors of these. Walk me through your resume. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself is a little bit more nuanced, right? The framework, you should open up, be a human, situate yourself in time and space. Hello, my name is Kelsey. I live in New York, but I grew up in Connecticut. So situate them. And it's also a chance to get specific because what if they have a friend that's from there? What if they're from there? So it's a really good chance to immediately make a connection. Talk about undergraduate, right? I went through Columbia. I studied archaeology. Just give them a sense. Yes, it's in your resume, but you're just trying to build a story. You're going to talk about your career highlights. My first role was here. I did this. You should not go into specific detail needlessly. What do I mean by that? Let's say you're technical. You don't need to go into the nitty-gritty of the code and etc. The other person sitting in front of you, virtually at least, you don't know what their background is. Well, you might do a little research, but might have nothing in common with you. Maybe you're really technical. This person's from retail and luxury goods. You need to explain your career in a layperson friendly way. So don't go into specifics that are jargony. And you should be highlighting growth if you have moved roles or if you've been promoted. You want to give them a sense of how you have increased your career through time. And then finally, end with something personal. In my free time, I like to scuba dive, I shoot archery. Again, it's another opportunity to sound like you rather than a stodgy MBA candidate. Questions on this? Oftentimes I hear, well, Kelsey, I've prepared this. It's about 6 minutes long. And for Columbia, that is too long. It is just an icebreaker question. We are trying to open up the floor so you can get to the quote unquote real questions. And so I tell my own clients, rehearse this to be about 1.5 to 2 minutes. Again, you're really hitting the top of the wave, not going into tremendous detail. Again, it's an icebreaker. You're trying to open up the floor. Let's go into the second one. Why MBA? It's a very common question. But I tell folks, you have to have the wherewithal in your interview. When is this question being asked? Because if it's the first real question being asked, you have to remember your interviewer doesn't know you. They don't have your application. They don't know what your goals are. So to really nail this question, if it's really the first and you haven't discussed your goals yet, you can back up. You know what? In order to answer this question, I want to give you a little context on my goals. Short term, I will move to management consulting in the healthcare sector at a firm like me. Long term, I want to open up my own healthcare consulting firm serving underserved populations in the North American region. Why an MBA? While I have experience in healthcare, an MBA will give me the academic frameworks around healthcare to complement my practical experience, the operations and the strategy frameworks as well. See how it's a part A. I'm going to back up and give you a little bit about my goal, just so the why MBA makes sense. And then part B, you're answering the question fully. Why an MBA for you? Let's talk about arguably the most important question, why CBS? What are they looking for here? They're looking for specificity, they're looking for excitement, and they're looking that you've actually done your research. And so because this is such an important question, and because strong ones are so specific, it's so important to be clear, again, so you remember what you're going to say and that the person receiving the information can keep track of everything. So surprise, I've got another framework. Part A is very short. There are many reasons why I love Columbia, but the top 3 reasons, for example, are its healthcare academics, its New York City location, and its extracurricular breadth. Stop. Pause. Just for a second, but you've given them a synthesis, a summary sentence on what you're about to talk about. So they're already prepared and you've just refreshed yourself. Then in part B, you're going to go through each of them and expand. This is really a nice top-down answer. So in terms of healthcare academics, classes like A, B, and C, the healthcare association, blah, 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 blah. Really good answers here dig into maybe how you know about this in talking with students like A and B. I know that they got so much from a class like la, 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 la. When you go down into, for example, its New York City location, it's nice to show that this is how you've already started plotting things out. So there's thousands of nearby alumni in New York City. A lot of them stay nearby, not everyone. But you can talk about maybe how you might utilize the alumni network that's close by. Maybe there are alumni that are working at your goal company. So for example, nearby companies like ZocDoc or Flatiron Health. One, it's easy for me to maybe pursue an in-semester internship as well as have coffee chats that are just a subway right away. See how specific I'm getting and how it actually sounds uniquely like me? Finally, if you want to talk about extracurricular breadth, this is the time. You've got a lot of this in your third essay, so start pulling those out. I can't wait to take advantage of the Gourmet Club or the Better Halves Club or the Hermes Society. Really good answers here talk about you. And so, for example, if you have the world's best tiramisu recipe, just an example, you can't wait to bring that and share that to the Gourmet Club. Look how specific it is. Instead of, I like the Gourmet Club, it's, I know exactly what I'm going to bring there and what I can't wait to share with my classmates. Okay. Hope that made sense. We're going to roll over to a couple more questions. Behavioral questions. This strikes fear and panic into so many people, but what you have to know is you got to be a little bit relaxed about this. Clear, but a little relaxed. These questions are testing two things: your ability to tell a clear story, even if the person's wholly unfamiliar with the situation, and then two, thinking on your feet. Rather than having the perfect rehearsed answer, a big mistake I see or a common pitfall is that someone will be asked a question, but they've prepared something different. So they'll try to make it work. Don't try to do that. Try to be a little bit more nimble. I've got another framework here. Important tips, though, is you got to actually address the question being asked. Don't try to shoehorn in. Try to be a little bit relaxed. If you do get a question that said, oh, I didn't prepare for that, a really handy trick: have something to drink nearby. And so take a swig of water. So you give yourself a couple seconds to think about that. Additionally, you can say, can I have a moment to think about that? It's a very human and normal thing to do. When you do get to answering, don't let details bog down the answer. When I rehearse this with clients, sometimes they'll go into the who and the how and the what and the technical detail. Don't let details get in the good way. And you shouldn't be speaking for 5 minutes. Then, framework. You've all heard of STAR. I think it's a little clunky to remember. So I personally use SAR, situation. Give just enough context for somebody to understand what this is. What are the major problems? Action. What did you do? A lot of folks will talk about, my team did this, my team did that. No, this question's asking about a time when you did something. And then finally, result. You do have to cover how that thing went, even if it didn't go well, right? Tell me about a time where you moved something along. Well, maybe you didn't move it to completion. That's okay, because the second part, what is a lesson you learned from that? You're going to pull the answer up. This situation taught me that X. I said a lot on this slide. And so I thought to myself, let's actually put this into action. And I'm going to take my own advice and get a swig of water. All right, let's put this into practice. Can you give me an example of a time where you took a risk? Situation. So I work at a $50 million fund focused on dentists. Dentists are traditionally set in their ways. They're very protective of their industry, and they don't like a lot of change. In raising a new fund, we wanted to open up our aperture. We wanted to get new investors, and we wanted to raise additional capital outside of our existing investor base. I suggested focusing on how oral health is healthcare at large. There was a risk by changing our branding, by changing our messaging, we could alienate current investors. But what we did anyway, or what I did anyway, I just did my own thing. What I did was I revamped the website. I sought out new investors. I sought out additional corporate partnerships beyond dental. It worked. We raised $10 million. This taught me how to be creative in a very traditional silo, which is dentistry, how to think beyond traditional investor bases and widen the scope of the impact for my company. Is this a perfect answer? It is not. Nor is it a real answer, but I hope that gives you a sense for how you might answer this in not so many sentences. Let's talk a little bit about good and bad questions. So here up on the screen, I've got smiley faces and sad faces. Let's go through them. Common question: how are you going to contribute to Columbia? So a not so good answer is, I'm interested in the Better Halves Club, the South Asian Business Association, and the Retail and Luxury Goods Club. Why is that bad? It's not really specific. It kind of sounds like just everyone else, and it really betrays the amount of research that you might have done. And so I've mocked up a better answer. I'll contribute to CBS both in the classroom and in its club and extracurricular life. Bringing my love of karaoke, I'm going to coordinate trips downtown to karaoke bars. Having my partner join me will coordinate dinner parties for the Better Halves Club. And finally, I hope to bring my retail experience working from L'Oreal to host workshops and a series on sustainability within retail at the annual Luxury and Retail Goods Club. See how specific that is? You're bringing in yourself, you're bringing in your research. Let's go through another one. What sort of learning teammate might you be? So before I jump into that, if you don't know what a learning teammate is, You should. Take that as another piece of extra advice I'm giving you. Learning teammates, the cluster system, know that, Pat. A not so good answer, and it's a very common one that I hear, is I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to take on a leadership role. Period. It's not a good answer. It doesn't say anything. Bring this specific to you. So a better answer might be, in teams, I usually take on the role of organizer. I have a project managing superpower. In a recent project where we were setting off on a 6-month project, I volunteered, or my peers knew I had such a superpower that I took on the task of creating a Gantt chart to keep everyone's roles and responsibilities clear. So not only are you answering it, preparing the person, I'm going to be an organizer, you're priming them, but then you show them how you've done this in the past. What does your plan be if your short-term goal does not work out? Very common question, increasingly so. The economy's not that good. A lot of people have seen these employment reports, so please be prepared for this question. A not so strong answer. I'll just try recruiting for X again. It's not a good answer. And it doesn't show that you've had foresight into maybe what you might do, and you don't show that, you've thought about multiple possibilities. Secondarily, it's so increasingly common. When I was admissions, there were so many times where folks came to business school and totally changed what they wanted to do. That's okay. What this answer can show is that you've got a little bit of flexibility. Therefore, a better answer is, if I cannot make the pivot into investment banking, I'm going to open up my aperture and pursue corporate finance at a firm like X or Y. It shows that you're a little bit nimble. It shows that you've been thinking about it. Last example question. What other schools are you applying to? Most folks really struggle with this answer. You got to think about what they're trying to get here. They're trying to get a sense of, where is Columbia in that mix, for example, or really, where else are you going or thinking about going? There is varying answers that you could give, but one not good answer is, well, I'm applying to Tuck, Wharton, Booth, Fuqua, HBS, GSB, LBS. That's not great. It doesn't give the interviewer anything to work with. And so a better answer would be, first, I'd like to highlight how strong my interest is in CBS. But due to how competitive the MBA admissions is, I'm also applying to A, B, C, and D, right? From the outset, you're reiterating interest, and then you're contextualizing why you might be applying to other ones. Another common answer might be that, let's say you really have a focus in real estate. Now, there are a lot of programs that are fabulous in real estate, but maybe you might say, I'm really interested in real estate. We've talked a little bit about my goals. Therefore, I'm really interested in real estate programs, but Columbia really is the strongest, I feel, for me. Again, you're answering that question and sort of letting them understand where your heart might lie. Oh, and that's it. What I want to be able to do here is talk a little bit about questions that you might have for me. I see one in there, so thank you for that. We'll talk a little bit more about tips and tricks for interviews, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about what it's like to work for me and my particular spin on interview prep. Let's see. When addressing behavioral questions, thank you. Would you suggest starting with a topic sentence to take a more top-down approach? Or should I dive deeply into the context? It depends. There's no exact right framework. While I've suggested, you give that context, you could have a summary sentence. So in my example, and say, I really took a risk in pivoting the marketing strategy for my fund. Let me give you a little context. $50 million fund, blah, 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 blah. So you can really do either. There's no perfect way. Again, it's whatever feels natural. Remember how I kept saying, the best thing is to come to it as you are. Secondly, I'm a big fan of top-down. And for anybody who might be a little confused on what that might be, bottoms-up answers are, I love the extracurricular breadth. I love the New York City location. I love the academics. And you start going into that rather than starting with that summary sentence. So Eva, thank you for the question. Either works. Do what comes most natural to you. Another question. Time that you should be spent for every question. Great question. It depends on the question. And so, what are longer answers? Behaviorals, right? You're telling a story, you're going into just enough context, not too much detail, but you're answering the question. Shorter questions, for example, what other schools are you applying to? What is your plan B? Or, for example, if they even say, what is your short term goal? That's not a 5-minute answer. It's not even a 2-minute answer. Something that I suggest to folks is be aware in your interview. What I mean by that are there are times where your interviewer sort of starts glazing over and you might see yourself like, oh, I should wrap this up. Generally speaking, I don't think anyone should be speaking for 5 minutes at a time. The interview is really meant to be a conversation. And so if you take up 5 minutes of a 30-minute interview on one question, well, you might only get to 5 questions because there's a little bit of Q&A at the end. And so really have the wherewithal to know, is this a 1-minute question, 2-minute question, behavioral, why CBS, or is this a shorter one, your plan B, what are you most excited for in terms of classes? Those are all shorter answers. How can early career candidates highlight success in their journey when compared to people who have more years of work experience or leadership experience? This is all dependent on you. Even if somebody is early in their career, that doesn't mean they haven't made an impact. How do you demonstrate impact? Well, maybe you've had increasing responsibility even in a short amount of time. For example, if you've been at a company for only a year, well, maybe you started out and you were in sales and your territory was only 10. Well, maybe you did such a good job that you were given 3 additional territories. Just using an example here, but the number of years actually doesn't necessarily correlate to your impact. And so think about your own context and think about what were times where I was given increased responsibility, or maybe you were given a promotion, or maybe you were given extra money. Whatever that thing is, it could also be, an additional project or a mentorship opportunity. So again, years of experience does not necessarily correlate to the impact. What are some good questions to ask the interviewer after an MBA interview? Fabulous question. I'll give you a hint and a little bit of my own ethos because when I was interviewing students, I would get some not so great and not so strong answers. So I largely put questions for the MBA interviewer kind of in 2 categories. One, an admissions member. If you're meeting with a member of the admissions committee, your questions are going to be different. The other bucket is a student or an alum. So let's talk about student and alum. The best kinds of questions do one of 2 things. One, they show how well researched you are, and then they ask a question, or they try to put that person in a mind frame of reminding them of the good times. Let me tell you. So for the first one, what would be a stronger answer? Interviewer, what was your favorite club? You're not going to get a good response to that. And it might not even be something you're actually genuinely interested in. As opposed to, we've already talked a little bit about how I'm so excited to join the Healthcare Association, but I'm also really interested in the football club. Interviewer, can you tell me a little bit about how you navigated your club choice? You're nodding to the fact that you're already well researched, that you know what you're talking about, and so you want them to be additive. On the flip side, reminding them of the good times. Interviews, they're there because they want to, right? Columbia doesn't go to folks and say, you must interview. They're asking for volunteers. And so you're already speaking to someone who loves the Columbia community. Now, asking questions, for example, like if you think back on your time, what is something that you would do again? And what's something that you might not do again? With the first one, what's something you do again? Immediately, they're going to have this movie reel of their favorite things they ever did, right? And so you're already priming them to think of, wow, why did I love Columbia? And so building off of that question, you're going to get a little bit more of a lot more of a better answer than what was your favorite class, right? That's a one-word answer. In this, when you ask about their experience or remind them of the good times, they're really thinking about what did I get the most out of? Let's go to the other one, admissions committee questions. These are tough, guys. What you should not do is ask questions that can be found on the website. Ask about their experience. Admissions committee members, we're human too. And when I was at Columbia, I would actually attend club events. I would sit in on classes. Now, not every admissions committee member is that involved, and that's their prerogative, and that's okay. But they know the class really well. These are experts. They read through their applications. Ask things like, you know, Kelsey, you've been there for 3 years. How have you seen the Columbia community change? You're asking for their opinion and their experience. Any question that sort of does the same, ask for advice, ask for their opinion is really a great way to actually have an enriched conversation. Hope that was helpful. If AdCom is interviewing, can I repeat the answers from my essay given that they might have already gone through my essays? That's a great question. I would say it depends, right? The interview is a chance really to give them, to get to know you more. And if you rely on what you've already written, well, you're not really giving them the chance to learn something new about you. Although it might be that you have such an amazing, for example, the second essay, a time where you celebrated or carried diversity or made a team more inclusive, that actually might be a really great topic, but maybe you want to do a different spin on it. How you might do that is, I know I wrote about this in my essay, I want to give you another glean into that. Like, yes, I founded a new employee resource group, but what you didn't know is that I did that in a time where there was a really tight budget, and I actually had to advocate for a budget. That essay was only 250 words. It's very short. Clearly, you can't put all the detail you want into there. So that's an example of how you can use the baseline, but give them an additional insight. Now, you might say to yourself, but my goals are my goals. Yes, that's true. For questions like, what are your goals? Yes, you are repeating what's in your essay number 1. And then for the clubs that you're actually interested in, yes, you might have put them in essay 3, but maybe there are others, right? That's, again, a very, very short essay. So you might not have put everything in there. Hope that was helpful. If you apply to just Columbia, what's the best way to communicate this during your interview when you're asked other programs to apply to? The truth is always the best answer. So Columbia is the only program that you apply to. One, very risky. That's very bold. I like it. I dig it. You can say that. What other programs have you applied to? Honestly, Columbia is my top choice. It is the only program that I applied to. Now, you might get a follow-up question. What happens if you are not accepted to Columbia, given you only applied to Columbia? Think through that answer. Will you turn and apply to other programs in round 3? Will you try to reflect on your application, try to improve and apply again? Think through what that might actually look like for you. What's the most annoying thing that shouldn't be done during an interview? I mean, I've seen a lot of things happen in an interview. I would say my answer probably won't surprise you. One is being rude or being late. When you schedule that interview, I know a lot of people, sometimes they travel for work or for vacation or whatever. There are times when one of my clients said, Kelsey, I forgot when the time zone was. And so, one, do not be late. That is an unforgivable mistake. You cannot be late. Know your time zones if you're moving around during that time. Don't be rude. A really interesting thing, I think, and it's important to bring up, is the other person on the side of the screen of you, they're human too. Yes, they volunteered their time. Yes, they've been trained, but they might have a bad day. They might have had something very stressful happen. They might come to the interview and they might seem very cold or chilly or distracted. Have grace. Remember how I said a little bit earlier in the presentation that you should set the tone? Regardless, don't let that shake you. In fact, when I train or when I go through interview prep with my own clients, I let them know what it feels like and to be prepared for what happens when the interviewer isn't giving you much. You should still be yourself. But when that happens, or if that happens, you shouldn't be, hey, you're looking a little distracted. You shouldn't say things like that. You shouldn't call them out. Other annoying things. I think that pretty much covers it. I think really, all in all, this is a chance for you to hopefully make a connection, right? And so if you're meeting someone for the first time, if you've ever had a coffee chat with Columbia students, alumni, or staff before, or in your personal life, whatever you wouldn't do there, you shouldn't do here. The same decorum and the same rules about social interactions apply here. It's no different. And the questions on your short-term goals, does AdCom expect straight specificity or some level of flexibility as well? It can be both. If you're asked that, what is your short-term goal? You do want to be specific. So just a note though, it's not always admissions, right? So I want to answer this holistically. Admissions may have read your application. You should answer it as if they have not, that it is still blind. So you should say, my short-term goal after Columbia Business School is to go to management consulting, focus on healthcare at a firm like Bain. You should give that specificity. Why? You're situating yourself in time and space, right? Are you trying to go to a large firm, a small firm, a global firm, a regional firm, right? They're situating you. But for students or alums, they don't know this about you. And so again, because you want to situate that in time and space, you do want to give that specificity. Now, a very common question, again, is what happens if that does not work out? What else would you do? You should answer the question asked. Don't try to shoehorn in information, because that's an example when an essay can bloom from 30 seconds or a minute to 4 minutes. Answer the question asked. And if they want to hear your backup or how else you're thinking about things, they can ask that question. What are frequent mistakes that international candidates make during the interview? How does the interview process for international candidates differ? Okay, great. The easy one. How does the interview process for international MBA candidates differ? It doesn't. It is, all interviews are virtual. All interviews are scheduled the same way, with the onus that's on you and the interviewer. So there is no different. I don't really think there's frequent mistakes that international candidates make. I think, having been involved in the interview process for more than 10 years, the same mistakes apply. It makes sense. Everyone is human. Sometimes they will be too stodgy or rehearsed. They will try to shoehorn in an answer that doesn't make sense. This is not specific to international candidates. The same mistakes that I see every year, it's ubiquitous. How to tackle questions like, if you get into all of your top choice programs, which would you choose? Well, if someone asks you if you have a top choice program, usually you only have one top choice, right? That's why it's a top choice. But I think that, look, I don't think you're going to be asked this question. And if you are, make it your own. How are you making the decision? How are things ranked? So for example, if you really want to go to an urban program, a program that is in a major city. Additionally, if you want something with a strong alumni base in a specific industry like real estate, you should have your reasons why. What is your North Star in trying to choose a program? So a quick example might be, if I'm admitted into all the programs, I want to reiterate that, based on what we've talked about before, it's incredibly important for me to have a program that is strong in finance resources, that is nearby a lot of the target firms that I'm trying to go to, and then finally has a rich extracurricular life. Columbia, as we've already discussed, has all of those. Try to situate it and be honest. Ooh, can I refer to notes during an interview? How's this viewed by the interviewer? Ideally, no. If you're reliant on notes, what that means, or what that signals to me, is that you're still feeling a little nervous, right? And you want to get to that point where you're zen, where you can talk about anything. Look, is it possible that even by creating notes and having them over here, just by writing them down, you might feel a little bit confident? Maybe that'll help, and maybe you never need to look at them. If you are having a conversation and you're looking over here suddenly, they're going to know. There are many applicants that feel at ease and can answer. And so, by comparison, you might look not as prepared, but really, my advice is try not to rely on notes. It kind of stilts the conversation. And honestly, it can be a very human thing. If you have, 2 classes, but you forget the third, when you're talking about, this class will give me this class will give me that. And if you forget it, say, I'm so sorry, it's slipping my mind right now, but I happen to know about what the class is about. It's a pretty human thing to do. Are there questions that the interviewer cannot ask you? Oh, what an interesting question. When I trained alums and current students to be good interviewers, we did give them guidance that you really should stick to the interviewer. We actually told them, please don't ask them what other schools that they're applying to, but it's such a common question now. So that's number one. Admissions isn't there in the interview. If you're interviewing with a student and alum, they don't really have control. I will be very honest. There are times where someone will go a little off the wall and ask questions that they should not ask. Maybe they involve current events or politics, and they shouldn't be asking that. I did have a client in round one ask something pretty sensitive, and I thought it was overstepping. We didn't do anything at the time, but admitted students always get this form of, is there anything you'd like to share? I encourage them to share that that question was asked. If you are asked a question that you are, one, unable to answer, or two, you don't want to answer, you have to have a little tact, right? 2 years ago, there was a client of mine. I said, how did the Columbia interview go? And she said, I had a question I just didn't know the answer to. It was along the lines of, can you tell me about your favorite podcast? And this person didn't listen to podcasts. And so they did not have an answer. Well, that's not ideal. So what she could have done in retrospect is say, I'm not a big podcast listener, but I am a voracious reader, or, I'm a big fan of documentaries. Is it the perfect answer? No, but you're still giving the interview something to work off of. But to answer your question, are there questions that they should not ask you? Yes. Yes, there are, but they're really on the edge. But again, there's only so much admissions can control when somebody's in the interview with you. How formal or informal does one need to be during an interview, or does it depend on the interviewer? Great question. It kind of actually depends on you. What you should come to the interview with is giving them a chance to learn more about you. Are you formal? Are you informal? Are you bubbly? Are you extroverted? Or are you maybe quiet or reserved? Whatever you are, that's how you come to the interviewer. Your interviewer, though, can be many things. It could be a current student. It could be someone with 20 years of experience. It could be someone very senior. That does not change how you should show up to the interview. I think we've got time for maybe one more question, maybe two, before we go to the mock Q&A. Selby, do we have any more questions? We might not. Great question. Should we be prepared for any unconventional or creative questions? So kind of building off a question that was asked, should they be asking you unconventional, crazy questions? They shouldn't be, right? They're directed not to let me say that differently. They're not assessing, how creative or how zany you can possibly be. It's really, about the MBA, but these can happen. Remember in the beginning of the conversation, I talked a little bit about like knowing the pillars of you, like your choices, the things that bring you joy. If you do a deep dive, for example, if you walk through your resume, every single bullet, what did you say your interests were? In the application, they ask for your hobbies. If you really review those, oftentimes you can be a little bit flexible. Let me give you a crazy example. This is not a real example. I'm just making this up. If you could choose any song to be your anthem, what would it be? Now, one, that's not really a fair question, but two, I personally would think about, the pillars of me. What am I? So for me, I like scuba diving. I like archery. I'm a little adventurous. So I would choose Welcome to the Jungle. I'm making this up. But I would say, that's what I would choose. It's an upbeat and lively one. It depicts, it being in zany situations. It's not a fair question, but if you do get something, you think about, what are some things that really represent me, and try to quickly match that to something that gives you. With these questions, it's not your literal answer, the name of the song that matters. It's your logic to back it up. Okay, one more, and then we'll jump to the mock Q&A. For reapplicants, Should we mention this fact to the interviewer and try to show our growth, or cover that area only if asked? Why not? I think of this coming up in an example, a question like, why CBS, or how might you contribute, or what are you most excited for? In any of those questions, you could say, I've built a relationship with Columbia over the past 2 years. I'm a reapplicant. Now more than ever, I think Columbia is a great fit for me, blah, 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 blah. And so you can bring that up. It shows a little bit of resilience and it shows continued interest. Must you mention it? You don't have to, but if it feels natural, if it's compelling for you, you can absolutely do that. And I showed you a way in which you absolutely could, and it makes sense. Cool. We're at time. We get to go over to the Q&A mock. If you're unable to join, again, I'm Kelsey Kephart from Embark MBA. I'm offering 10% off any interview prep sessions with me. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll see, hopefully, most of you in the Q&A mock.